Let me ask you something before we begin. Have you ever said something in 10 seconds that took 10 years to undo? Have you ever watched the people who love you most flinch when you walk into a room, not because they don't trust you, but because they don't know which version of you is coming through the door? If you're struggling with anger right now, if you've lost jobs, lost friendships, lost the quiet peace of your own home because of a temper you can't seem to control, then this story is for you, because it was written for someone exactly like you. Before we go further, take a second to like this video and subscribe, because on this channel we tell real stories about discipline, healing, and the choices that quietly rebuild a broken life. There was once a man named Daniel who believed his anger was simply part of who he was, something inherited, something permanent, something he had no real power to change. He told himself that other people were too sensitive, that the world was too slow, too careless, too disrespectful, and that his outbursts were simply fair responses to an unfair world. But deep down, in the moments after the shouting stopped, when the silence returned and the faces around him went pale, he felt something he never admitted out loud: shame. Daniel's wife stopped bringing up small problems because small problems became large arguments. His son stopped asking him to help with homework because one wrong answer could turn into 20 minutes of yelling. His coworkers stopped inviting him to lunch because nobody wanted to sit across from a man who might explode over a delayed email. Daniel wasn't cruel by nature. He was exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely unaware that his anger wasn't protecting him. It was slowly taking everything away from him, one relationship at a time, one silence at a time, one flinch at a time. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday evening when his son, only 8 years old, accidentally spilled a glass of juice across a stack of important papers Daniel had left on the table. In an instant, Daniel's voice filled the house. His son froze, eyes wide, lips trembling, and then he said something Daniel never expected. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad, I always make you angry. Not the papers, not the mess. I always make you angry." Daniel stood there in stunned silence, because in that single sentence he suddenly understood how his son saw him, not as a father but as a storm to be avoided. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment over and over, the fear in his son's eyes, the apology that should never have needed to be said. Somewhere around midnight, he made a decision that would quietly transform the rest of his life. He decided that his anger did not deserve to keep winning. The next morning, he visited an old family friend, a retired counselor named Mr. Whitfield who had known Daniel since childhood. Daniel sat across from him and finally admitted the truth. "I don't know how to stop. I don't even see it coming until it's already happened." Mr. Whitfield nodded slowly and said something Daniel never forgot. "Anger isn't the enemy. Anger unexamined is the enemy." Anger has a warning system built into it, a rising heat, a tightening jaw, a quickened breath, and most people ignore those warnings because they've never been taught to notice them. He gave Daniel one simple practice. The moment he felt that first spark of heat rising in his chest, he was to pause and silently name 3 things he could see around him. Not count to 10, not walk away immediately, just notice, name, and breathe. It sounded almost too simple to matter, but Daniel was desperate enough to try anything. The first week was humiliating. He forgot constantly. He snapped at a driver who cut him off, snapped at his wife over a misplaced set of keys, snapped at himself for snapping. But on the 8th day, something shifted. His son knocked over a glass of milk at breakfast, and Daniel felt the familiar heat rise in his chest, his jaw tightening, his voice ready to launch. And in that half-second, he paused. He silently noticed the yellow curtains, the steam rising from his coffee, the worried look already forming on his son's face. And in that tiny gap between feeling and reacting, something powerful happened. He chose differently. He said quietly, "It's okay, buddy. Let's clean it up together." His son looked up at him, not with fear this time, but with disbelief, and then something even rarer, relief. Weeks became months, and Daniel wasn't perfect. He still felt anger rise inside him regularly, but now there was always that small pause, that tiny gap where he could choose his next move instead of being ruled by his first impulse. Slowly, His wife began sharing small problems again. His son began asking for help with homework again. His coworkers began inviting him to lunch again. Nothing about his life had magically become easier, but everything about how he responded to difficulty had changed, and that changed everything else. One evening, nearly a year later, his son spilled juice on the same kitchen table, and instead of flinching, he simply looked up and said, "It's okay, right, Dad? We'll just clean it." Daniel smiled and felt something in his chest finally settle into place, because his son no longer expected a storm, he expected patience, and that more than any apology told Daniel exactly how far he had come. If you're struggling with anger tonight, understand this. Your anger is not a life sentence. It is simply a warning system you were never taught to read correctly. You don't need to eliminate it. You need to notice it before it speaks for you. The space between feeling and reacting, no matter how small, is where your entire future gets decided. So the next time that familiar heat begins rising in your chest, pause, breathe, notice 3 small things around you, and give yourself permission to choose differently, because the people who love you aren't asking you to never feel angry again. They're simply asking for that one small pause, that one quiet gap where the person they love gets to show up instead of the storm. If this story reached something in you tonight, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need this exact reminder today. Because somewhere out there, someone is fighting the same battle you are. And your strength, your choice to pause, might be exactly what shows them it's possible too.